Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, SaaS Startup. This is actually the first part in a series of webinars. We're going to focus in on customer-driven product development. So maybe less of the technical nitty-gritty, but a lot more about how to do customer discovery and figure out whether you're on the right track with what you're trying to build. To start things off, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jake Laverne, Senior Director of Product Management here at DigitalOcean, focused on developer experience. And I'm really excited to be delivering this webinar. I mean, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I've been doing product management for almost 2 decades, and I love bringing new products to market. Maybe just to take a minute and acknowledge everything that's going on. Hopefully everyone is staying safe and healthy. I just wanted to highlight that DigitalOcean does have a hub up on our community, the COVID-19 hub. There are projects there, open projects that folks can contribute to. If you want to register your project, feel free to. We're just doing our small part to help out. Just so everyone knows, I'll be sharing links that are used throughout this presentation afterwards. So we'll follow up and post all those links, no problem. And as we go, I'll defer questions. If you do have questions, you can feel free to use the question or chat features of GoToWebinar, and we'll do our best to address a handful of those at the end. And for the ones we can't address, we'll take those to the community and continue the conversation there. Just a few words about DigitalOcean. Founded in New York City in 2012. We've been lucky to raise some good funding, and we're the 3rd largest and fastest growing cloud provider, over 80 million droplets launched to date. We've got 12 data centers in 8 global markets, and a seamless cloud infrastructure, everything from compute services like droplets and Kubernetes to managed databases and object and block storage. But I don't want to spend too much time talking about DigitalOcean. What I really want to talk about is how you can build your software startup and how you can use customer-driven product development to make sure that you're building the right product for your customers and your users. And I'll try and draw on some experiences that I've had building out software products throughout my career. So let me just acknowledge everything that's going on, right? I think something new is always now, like this moment in time may feel more difficult than ever, right? We know that there's so much going on, both in terms of health around the world, but also in terms of economic conditions, right? It's definitely a bit of a roller coaster. But I just want to highlight that there's hope, even in challenging times, and especially in challenging times. So just take a minute to acknowledge the last economic downturn that we had in 2008. We can see here a chart of the S&P 500 from 2008 until it recovered and reached that same level pre-recession almost 4.5 years later. And so if we look in that window of time, know that some of the greatest tech companies in the world were built during that challenging time. And even DigitalOcean was founded in that window between the drop that we saw in 2008 and the full recovery that we saw in 2013, along with a bunch of others. And, you know, there are really a few tips for challenging times like this for startups, and I'll pull some from Founder Institute and some from an interview that I did with a DigitalOcean customer. So, you know, Founder Institute is a great article talking about maximizing startup advantages during a downturn. And again, like I said, we'll share out links afterwards. Really 5 major bits of advice for maximizing startup advantages during a downturn. One, you can move quickly, right? While big companies are reorganizing as a startup, you can move quickly. Downturns create problems that entrepreneurs can solve. You can save on costs while big companies cut their fat. There's lots of opportunity often to get the things that you need as an entrepreneur for less than you normally would. You can find the talent that's seeking opportunity right now while big companies shed workers. And remember that all recessions end and hardy startups are the readiest to rebound. Maybe to add some more personal color, I had a chance to talk with Akib, who was co-founder and CEO of Cloudways and a serial entrepreneur before that. And he lived through the most recent recession as an entrepreneur. And he had some lessons learned that he wanted to share. And maybe similar to what we're looking at from Founder Institute, 6 points here. Not raising VC can be a blessing in disguise. It's okay to build and bootstrap. It does create hardier companies, more resilient companies. And Cloudways was an example there. Challenging times offer room for reinvention. So there's opportunity for sure. And as entrepreneurs, we know and see that. In challenging times, entrepreneurs are unique because they're resilient, purposeful, and don't take things for granted, right? There's a focus that comes with what we're experiencing right now. And if you can use the opportunity to serve your customers one at a time, individually, knowing them specifically and genuinely helping them, that's the recipe for building something hardy and resilient. Something specifically from Cloudways, who is a managed hosting platform that gives digital agencies and e-commerce businesses flexibility and choice in how their websites are hosted, all backed by 24/7, 365 support. What Akib told me is that they were able to successfully transition from projects to products, right? So as that managed hosting platform, they started out working one-on-one, project by project with individual customers, and that was okay. They didn't have to figure out how to scale to be the big company that they are today all at once. They were able to make that transition from projects to products. And then finally, invest for the long haul. This is what Akib told me was important, even in challenging times, especially in challenging times. Make the decisions that do get you investment for the future. And so with that background, right, like if we had to take away one major thing from all of that, it's really that we need to get ruthless about solving real customer pain points now more than ever. We need to be obsessed with helping our customers. And so how do we do that? And as entrepreneurs and technologists, a lot of times we think the answer is you just build it. You've got the greatest idea in the world, you build it, and they will come. This is a reference to a pretty old movie, Field of Dreams. But what I've found, at least in my career, is that this is not true. It's the field of broken dreams, because if you build it, they won't come. It's a very rare occurrence for somebody to have an idea, execute on it, sort of alone and in the dark, unveil it to the world and have everybody jump in and use it. And so we really have to figure out an alternative way. How do I know that this approach doesn't work? If you build it, they will come or they won't come, because I've lived it. If we go all the way back to 2000, just before another big economic downturn, the dot-com bust, these don't exist yet, right? I'm going to share an example of something we're working on, but you got to get in the mindset of 2000, right? We don't have these types of devices back then. But I had the opportunity to work with a few smart people from MIT, and we thought we could build a better search engine. And we did. At the time, we built a search engine that let you use natural language. And it was amazing. You could ask questions on a stock site or a financial site like, show me the companies with revenues over $30 billion. And it would be able to understand it and provide the answers. And at the time, this technology felt like magic. And so it's a great example of one of these opportunities. You know, if you build it, they will come. It was just unbelievable technology from really smart people. But it turns out nobody wanted to type full sentence queries, right? Why are you making me type so much? When we launched this product in 2000, people would use 1.9 words on average in their queries. And when we exited the business in 2004, people were using 2.1 words. So we kind of missed the mark there, even though we had great technology. So why did we fall into this trap back then? We had a lot of amazing positive indicators. Venture capitalists bought into the vision, customers were paying us, we had smart engineers, or as we say here in Massachusetts, wicked smart engineers. We were heavily invested in our solution, but we did not talk to users all the time. We missed the opportunity to really learn from what our users and customers were saying to us. So what could we have done differently? We're going to spend the rest of this webinar talking about a bunch of the techniques that could help with situations like this, hopefully before you get into them. But I'll just hit on some of the examples of what went wrong here and what we could have done differently. One, for us, we could have understood the difference between users and customers. We'll touch on this a little bit throughout here, but for some folks, customers and users are the same, right? So for some businesses, your customer is who pays you, your user is who uses the product, and those are one and the same, especially if we're talking about consumer software, or if we're talking about products that are built for smaller teams, then you're selling to your users. But we didn't learn quickly enough back then was that we were selling to customers, right? There were CIOs who were footing the bill for our software, but our users were actually the people on sites like charlesschwab.com or staples.com that were using the search engine that we built. So it's kind of important for us to have learned that difference and that distinction. So let's talk about learning, right? Like, it's great to realize that in hindsight, but how can you learn that ahead of time? And the real answer, and this is what I wish I had known back then, and that really is the point of the whole rest of this webinar, is to build just enough to learn something critical that you don't know. This is the major tip, and we're going to spend time digging into this and going through examples of this, but this is what it comes down to, building just enough to learn something critical that you don't know. And there are lots of ways to say this, and so we can look at a quote from Reid Hoffman, founder of LinkedIn, and he said, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. And there's a reason for this. It's not because we want to cut corners. It's not because we want to deliver something that's not useful to our customers. It's actually the opposite. It's because while we think we know exactly what the world needs, the best way to test that is to put something out there and see for real with your own eyes what the response is. And so some fun and interesting examples. Version 1 of LinkedIn. This is what it looked like, right? If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. So got to put something out there in order to learn and gain the feedback about whether you're on track with real pain points in the world. Another fun example, Twitter, version 1. They didn't even have enough time to use vowels. So here we see they're testing that concept, getting it out there quickly. Amazon.com, first version, right? It's easy to be fooled into thinking in these days that every product that we know and love came out fully formed in one fell swoop, but it's not true. And even at DigitalOcean, as we learn more about our marketplace, the very first version we put out there was literally a catalog of different applications. And so we use this mantra ourselves. So where should I start, right? Like, it's great to think about putting out something that I'm embarrassed about, something that lets me learn, but there are so many different things to learn. Where should I start? The answer is you start with the riskiest first. That's what it comes down to, is you think about your entire idea, all the aspects of it, and we'll talk about all those aspects in a minute, but you think about all the aspects of it and you figure out which one makes you most nervous. Which one do you have the biggest doubts or questions about? And that's going to help you realize where you should start. And so when we take a look at a startup, a concept, a new business, there's a great framework from IDEO, and again, links will follow, but how to prototype a new business. And we think about a business, there's really three major aspects of any startup or business. Feasibility, so can I build or create what it is that I want to build or create? Desirability, does anybody want it? And then viability, can I make money off of this, right? Are people willing to pay for what I've delivered? And so when we think about the riskiest part of our business, our startup, we can think about these three areas and try and decide, okay, well, where am I most nervous? And just a quick hint, it's usually not feasibility. It turns out that feasibility, though often as entrepreneurs, as technologists, we might think that the biggest risk is, can I build this thing? But it's not usually that. Usually it's one of the other two. And so let's dig down a layer deeper, right? This feasibility, desirability, viability, that's a good framework, broadly speaking, for how to prototype a business. But let's get down to even more nuts and bolts. So we can talk about two, what I would call sort of Bibles of startup. Hopefully most folks have seen this, but if not, it's a great chance to read these. The Lean Startup by Eric Ries talks about prototyping and iterating to a successful startup. And Ash Maurya's Running Lean is a great book that's really tactical. It's almost like a workbook for the Lean Startup that guides you through steps you can use to assess, analyze, plan out your startup. And we're going to use some of the items from Running Lean as a framework for thinking about how we can learn more about our customers. So this is the Lean Canvas, great resource, comes from the Running Lean book, although there's even more background behind it. Highly recommend the book, but it's a one-pager. The nice thing about the Lean Canvas is it's a one-pager that lets you lay out all the aspects of your business, of your startup, of that SaaS that you're building out or other startup that you're building out. So the areas are the problem or pain point that my customers have, the solution, what are the key metrics, how will I know this is working, what's my unique value proposition and my unfair advantage that differentiates me, what are my channels, customer segments, the cost structure, and the revenue stream, right? This is just a way to lay out a business on one page, and it's amazing. It's something that you can draft and refine and draft and refine. It's a way to stay focused on what it is that you're building. And now, in the book Running Lean itself, there is a recommended sort of flow through these things, right? Start with the problem, move on to customer segments, unique value proposition, solution. So we can go through in order, right? I mean, all other things being equal, we can go through in this order. But there's a hack even on top of this, right? There's a way to move even faster through this cycle. And it's to ask yourself, which of these segments, which of these boxes makes me most uncomfortable about my business, right? That's going to give you the clue. If you're really honest with yourself, that's going to give you the clue about where you should focus your time, right? There is a trap of falling into doing the things that are most comfortable to us, the things that we feel are a most natural fit to our skills and abilities. But the real clue comes from figuring out what about your business makes you most uncomfortable and leaning in to that discomfort and starting there. And so, that's helpful to say at the high level, but let's dig in to some real examples of what might make me feel uncomfortable as I'm starting my business and how we might go about answering questions, building the minimum we can build in order to figure out how to get comfortable with that. And so in this example, let's say I know what customer segment I'm going after, right? Like I've done the research, or I have expertise in a given market, and I know what customer segment I want to target, but I'm not sure that I really understand their problems, right? I think I do. Maybe I think I've already got the solution to their problems and I've skimmed quickly past the problems themselves, but really, maybe the concern is that I'm not sure what my target customer's problems are, right? So this could be the thing that's keeping me up at night. So if this is the area that we feel we've got to focus in on, these top 3 problems, then the next thing, once we've admitted this discomfort, to ask ourselves is, what's the simplest way to test this? Right? I know what one of the most expensive ways to test this is. It's to go off, imagine I understand all the problems of this customer segment, come up with a solution, build out that solution, embody it in software, go out and then try and sell that solution. That's not the simplest way, right? That's probably one of the most expensive ways to test out your understanding of the problem space. So what's the simplest way? It's probably obvious when you think about it, but it's to talk. It's to talk with people in that target segment. Now, if we left it at this high level, even that alone, right? Even that insight alone is helpful to know really what I need to do probably is put down my dry erase marker or my whiteboard, put down my code editor, right? And take the time to get out and talk to my customers. But let's go a little deeper. We'll talk about a technique that we've used here at DigitalOcean to formalize these conversations, right? And it's not something we've invented, it's just something that we've taken advantage of thanks to having a great product design and product research team here. But it's something that you can take advantage of too with your own startup. And that's to go out and use a framework known as jobs to be done. And so this framework lets us think about things less from a solution perspective and more from a perspective of the jobs and pain points that our customers have. What are their problems? And so there's some good references here. Again, links will follow. jtbd.info talks about what jobs to be done are. But the short, simple answer about a job to be done is this just a way of capturing something that one of your customers or users is trying to accomplish without going into the solutions, right? So down that bottom right-hand side, the template is when I am a aspiring photographer, I want to capture beautiful images so I can feel like an artist, right? Like you've really got to get at the pain points, the problems, the desired outcomes that your users have. And we'll take a look at another example of some jobs to be done that we uncovered at DigitalOcean. But that's our goal first, is to talk to customers, talk to users, and understand what jobs they have, what outcomes they're trying to accomplish. And you've really got to force yourself not to jump to solutioning. You know, when you're asking questions in interviews with users, there's a natural desire to put your solution forward. Let me show you something. Let me demo something. Let me tell you what I think could solve this. And really here you want to hold open the space to explore the pain points first and the problems. We'll take a look at an example in a minute, but we want to make sure that we're trying to find problems across the entire journey that our customers have. So there's not just one thing that they're trying to do, right? Like as a photographer, it's not just that moment of taking the picture. It's actually all the way from the moment of figuring out what camera to buy or how to use the camera on my phone, all the way through to taking the picture and then editing the picture and then sharing the picture, right? There's an entire journey that a customer has. So you want to make sure you're doing enough interviewing to tease out the desired outcomes at lots of different steps along the journey. You want to write those down. You want to gather them together into larger themes. You want to build a mental model of like the high level desired outcomes that people have, right? We've got to get from what could be dozens or hundreds of desired outcomes down to 10 or 20. If we're working with a team, we can even run a touchpoint mapping workshop that's just going to help us in a methodical way group together the desired outcomes that we find. We're going to write user stories, and then we're going to jump into a quantitative exercise, but that comes next. So let's take a deeper dive look in this part, right? The interviewing users and figuring out what their desired outcomes are. So an example of an interview script that we used, so we had a bunch of questions that we were asking, but this is just one example of a question. And you can see how open-ended it is. We would interview users or potential users of DigitalOcean and say, tell me about a specific instance where you faced a particularly difficult situation with a tool or solution that you or your team was using. What was the tool or solution and what was the story? Very open-ended. Tell me a story. And now you've got to listen. Hopefully you have the ability to maybe record or bring somebody along with you in this type of interview, but your goal is to hear in your users or customers' words exactly what they're saying to you. And at the end of the day, what you're going to try and do with those is turn them into jobs to be done, like we were looking at. Maybe just one more example of a question that we used in this interview. Tell me about a specific instance where a tool or solution that you or your team was using worked particularly well. Right? We're testing the boundaries. We want to find the pain points, but we also want to find out when people were having a positive experience. What was the solution or tool and what was the story? Again, very open-ended, not demoing anything. I'm not trying to push my solution. I'm trying to understand what my users' pain points are, what their everyday problems are, what they want to achieve and accomplish. And so when you do this, you walk away with a bunch of notes, a bunch of recordings, and your goal is to turn those notes and recordings into a job to be done, right? So a situation, a motivation, and an expected outcome. This is tricky until you get the hang of it. I had a hard time doing it myself, but luckily we have a great user researcher here, Colleen Diaz, who was able to help me through it. But just take the time and try and break apart your notes into these types of jobs to be done. So here's an example that we took away from those interviews. We heard from a handful of customers, when we're a very small team trying to build something new, right? Again, this is a DigitalOcean example. We're out talking to teams of developers. We often want to use third-party solutions for large parts of it. Why? So that we can focus more of our time on the things that make us unique, right? So here you can start to see, we're not talking about anything product specific, solution specific, right? This is a chance to get at the pain points and problems that our customers are having. And when we go through and we do this, we get groupings of these expected outcomes, groupings of things, right? Focus more time on the things that make us unique, be able to better serve our customers, be able to build something new without having to worry about my underlying tools and technology, right? Those were the types of outcomes that we started getting. And so then you can shift into a second stage of this exercise. And that second stage lets us take what we heard qualitatively through conversations and interviews, and even, meetings with people by phone, and we can turn it into more qualitative. And our goal here is to make sure that we're not biased based on a small sample set towards things that, or to a few people, we're not critical to solve and be able to serve a broader market. And the way we just took those desired outcomes from we used own words, right? No solutions, we weren't testing solutions. And what we wanted to do was just design a quantitative study that let us understand whether lots of people had the desired outcomes and pain points, and how well served those outcomes were by the existing market. So not just served they were by DigitalOcean, but how well served the outcome available tool or solution in the market. And so here the answer, took a little bit of work, but it was fairly straightforward survey. And so we used survey tools. In our case, we used a tool called Get Feedback. Made it easy for us to go out and find a statistically significant set of developers to not interview, but survey, and find out how they felt about these desired outcomes. And so to give a real tangible example, our research, in that example we just saw, we had a desired outcome that said, I want to be able to focus more on the things that make my company unique. Right? That's what a number of our told us as we were out interviewing. Okay, how can we make this quantitative? We turn it into a survey question. We said, when thinking about your daily work, how important is it to focus more on the things that make your company unique? It's just a rating scale, 1 to 5, not at all important to very important. So this gives us some feedback about how important this desired outcome is. And in that same survey, we also asked, how would you rate your current set of tools and how well they help you focus more on the things that make your company unique? And so again, a 5-point scale, 1 to 5, very dissatisfied to very satisfied. When we get that, right, when we get answers to these questions about these desired outcomes, how important are these desired outcomes and how well served are you in your current tools or solutions, we can then start to map out a bunch of different desired outcomes. In our case, we had 10 or 12 desired outcomes that we were testing. We did a survey with all 10 or 12 of them. We found out how many of them were important, but people's satisfaction with current tools and solutions was low, right? And how many of them were important, but people's satisfaction with their existing tools was high, right? We can map this out, figure out where we can start to not only have pain points and understand the problems that we're solving for our customers, but even start to get at what might be our unique value proposition. So this was a very helpful exercise. Again, this is not something that we invented here. It's actually from outcome-driven innovation, which is sort of a specific framework with a book by Ulwick. Again, links to follow, but anybody can use this approach to start to tease apart the problems that a given set of users or customers might have, and then how well served those users or customers feel their current tools and solutions are solving those problems or those pain points. So let's bounce way back and look at another example, right? What we just went through is an example of some tools that we can use to identify the problems or pain points our customers have. We already know the target segment that we're going after. But let's take a look again back at the lean canvas and pretend that there's another area where we're struggling, right? I might feel confident about my unique value proposition. Maybe I went through the exercise we were just talking about. I've identified among my target customers what their top 3 problems are. And I even found some areas where they're underserved by their current tools and solutions. And so I was able to write a unique value proposition. But now I have no idea what channels are best for reaching my target customers, right? I feel good about my unique value prop, but I'm not sure what channels are best for reaching my target customers. And so we have to ask ourselves again, I'm trying to identify my path to these customers, my channels, what's the simplest way to test this? And again, we all have different biases, but if you're like me, entrepreneurial in nature, love to build stuff, maybe a technologist or engineer by training, the first thing you want to do is build something and then figure out what your channels are and kind of maybe even assume that if you build something great enough, the channels will just appear. But this is not the simplest way to test, right? It can take weeks, months, longer to build a full product. So instead, what's the simplest way to test what channels are going to help us reach our customers? And again, here the answer is simple, right? Test the channels. don't worry about the product yet, right? You can get almost as much learning about what channels are working if you have no product and just a placeholder landing page as if you had a product, right? So we're breaking the problem apart, right? We're just going to test specific pieces of our business or our business hypothesis. And we can do that in this case by trying channels like Google Ads, like Facebook ads, like a billboard, and have all those things land at a landing page or a phone number that doesn't have a product yet. It's okay. I know it can be really uncomfortable to put something out there and market to drive traffic to something that ultimately will be disappointing to your customers, but really, it's okay. There's a broad market for whatever it is that you're doing. And usually people, even when they're driven to a coming soon page or a landing page or a video, they're okay with that. It can usually build excitement. And so I think what I'm here to say is, if you're uncomfortable that you're going to be able to find a path to market, you don't have to build your product first and then find the path to market. You can start testing paths to market even before you have a product. And it might cause you a little bit of stress because you feel like you're disappointing your customers. But if you can turn it into something that builds anticipation, it's okay. Usually your earliest interested target customers are willing to stick with you. Now, of course, the important thing to do is you've actually got to measure, right? So if you're using digital channels, Google Analytics is going to become your best friend. And so I highly recommend learning everything you can about this free tool if you haven't already. It's going to give you a way to track how many users are coming in through different channels, how successful your different approach to go to market is. It's going to give you a lot of insight. And so I'm going to suggest that you really drill in and learn Google Analytics. And there are a bunch of other tools as well, and we'll talk about some of them. But at the same time, don't underestimate the low-tech channels, right? So, I mean, I talked a little bit about testing Google Ads or testing Facebook ads, other social media, but don't underestimate the low-tech channels. I mean, you can get on the phone and start cold calling or cold emailing. You can use word of mouth, talk to friends, talk to neighbors, talk to colleagues, former coworkers, and share the idea and let them know that if they're interested and they're willing to commit something now, some time, maybe a little bit of upfront money, that they can get a discount when that product's available. And so here we talk about measurement, right? If you're using cold calling, cold emails, if you're doing sort of more traditional selling, which could be super appropriate if what you're trying to build out is maybe more of a business-to-business offering. Here, the tools that you're using to track are just going to be pen and paper, spreadsheet, right? Like you're going to figure out for your list of contacts, you know, when you and the when you email them, and then what those interests offer, commit some like a willingness to do interviews with you in the future, or money, willingness to pay up front for that discounted offering when it's available, right? So you're just going to simply track your funnel and understand what it's taking to acquire one of your customers, and then what you can hope to get from those customers. Now, this topic, I mean, there is a lot behind marketing, and I don't think I could do it justice in this webinar, but I will point to a couple of places to really get a deep understanding of modern marketing and how to track your funnel and how to understand how to reach your customers in today's world. And one of them is Moz. There's an amazing set of beginner's guide for marketers and then HubSpot, the heroes of content marketing. And this is something that served DigitalOcean well. From our earliest days, we wrote as much content as we could, as many tutorials as we could. We really built that content marketing muscle early on. And when I talked to Akib at Cloudways, and he talked about investing for the future, this was one specific example he gave, which was for Cloudways early on. They invested heavily in content marketing from day one. It takes time for it to pay back, but it's extremely valuable and robust over time. What's the long and short of marketing? I mean, just to boil it down, lifetime value of your customer over the cost of acquiring that customer needs to be much, much greater than one. If you spend $1 to acquire a customer, you better be getting back much more than $1 over the lifetime of that customer. I mean, that's marketing in a nutshell. I know it's probably not enough to to go and to figure out the details from, but again, these resources that I linked to should help. Okay, so we've gone through a couple of examples. Let's do another example, right? We talked a little bit about what you can do if you don't know what your customers' pain points or problems are. We talked a little bit about what you can do if you don't understand what channels are best for reaching your customer. Let's go into another example as we look across the lean canvas. So let's say that I know my customers and their problems, but I'm not sure that my unique value proposition is going to result in revenue, right? So it's great. I figured out who I'm targeting and what their pain points are, but I don't know if it's viable, right? I don't know if these pain points are something that people are going to be willing to pay money or time and attention in order for me to solve. And so here we have to, as we focus in on unique value prop, but more specifically the revenue stream, what's the simplest way to test whether there's a revenue stream given my unique value prop? Simplest way to figure out whether my idea is feasible and whether I can generate revenue off of it. And again, a lot of times we might think that the answer is to build everything out and then try and sell it. But a lean startup will do this backwards. And we've seen now this has become more and more commonplace, right? We don't have website under construction pages anymore. It's very rare, right? People know, entrepreneurs know, we can all learn and remind ourselves that what you really need to do is sell it first. And Kickstarter is a great way to do this for certain types of products and offerings. But even without Kickstarter, we've got to figure out our own way to do this for our startups. But the important concept here to take away is that, again, as uncomfortable as it might feel, it's okay to ask your customers for revenue, for money, for commitment of something, commitment of time, commitment, even a letter of intent to pay for a product once it's available if you're building more of a B2B SaaS product, right? But asking your customers to commit upfront is okay. And it's a great way to find out quickly whether your startup, whether your business, whether your product is going to survive, whether it's actually feasible. Sorry, not feasible, but viable, right? Whether it can actually generate revenue. Because we don't have enough time in general in life, maybe now especially, to build things that are not viable. And so we've got to go out and find people who are willing to pay either with time, attention, or money for the thing that we're thinking about building before we go off and build it. And just an example, DigitalOcean, push code live in seconds, within customer or developer experience and our platform as a service group, we're building out new products to make it easier to deploy web applications to DigitalOcean. But before we have that product fully formed and ready for our customers, we go out and we find people who are willing to devote time and attention to using a beta when it's available, maybe even willing to pay for some droplets for that beta. That gives us a pretty clear indication of whether or not we have viability in the product that we're building out. And yes, of course, sometimes it is good to build something, right? So the lesson here is not to never build your product, but to know your own biases and know that maybe the thing that feels most comfortable to act on right now is not the right place to start. But when the time is right, of course you need to build your product, and hopefully you'll do it iteratively and continue to go through cycles of testing so that you know that all the checkboxes are checked, either because it's something you intuitively know so strongly that it's not uncomfortable. You've learned it maybe from years of experience in a given market or working with a given set of customers. But for those things that were uncomfortable, you've gone out and done the work in the simplest way possible, right? Without having to build an entire product or offering or company. You've gone out in the simplest way possible to validate. And so maybe now just a counter or a word of warning about all of this, which is not everything needs to be an experiment. We talked a lot in this webinar about how to experiment, how to iterate, how to do something simple and small in order to test. And sometimes when you get this tool set of testing and validating, creating hypotheses and really finding those things that you're uncomfortable about and doing what it takes to make yourself comfortable with them, you get into this cycle of experimenting with everything and testing everything. We've even done that here sometimes at DigitalOcean, where we think that we need to test something to identify whether we've built the perfect user experience for it, when really we have so much skill in our product design team that there are some things that we can just know and move forward on. And so I think what I want to counter everything I've said with is that everything that I've said so far, I want to counter that by saying not everything needs to be an experiment. Maybe a couple of examples, right? So tried and true patterns, right? Online, the web, e-commerce, shopping. The shopping cart is a tried and true pattern. There was a time back in 2000 where we were still testing and experimenting to understand whether people know what an online shopping cart is or whether they feel more comfortable with a shopping bag. We don't need to experiment with this anymore. Some patterns are so well established that we should just go with the norm and continue on. No need to waste our time experimenting. And then another example, you don't need to experiment when there's an emergency, right? If you've got customers today and you're supporting them and there's an incident or an issue, bug, a major problem, security breach, now is not the time to experiment to figure out whether it's important or not. You know what's right for your business and your customers in an emergency. And so I think it's important to move quickly then. So not everything needs to be an experiment. But having said that, right, that little sort of side note, when we do experiment, when we do learn, when we are trying to answer questions about our overall business plan and our lean canvas, how do we balance out quantitative versus qualitative? Well, we saw an example. I mean, we saw the example earlier when we're doing our jobs to be done and desired outcome research. We did both, right? It doesn't have to be a versus or an either or. It actually can be a both, and they can help each other out. And so we started with a qualitative set of interviews, conversations, right? That helped us tease out jobs to be done, which we then tested with a more quantitative survey. And that quantitative survey helped us figure out which of those outcomes were important to our customers or our target audience, and which of those were not, and also which of those were already well served by their existing tools and solutions, so that we could find a space for unique value. Here again, I'll maybe just give a public service announcement and a pointer, follow up with links, but there's a great presentation on YouTube now by Colleen Diaz, our lead user researcher, called Pivot or Protest. And it goes through a bunch of good examples of different research methodologies and some balance between quantitative and qualitative research. But maybe one more thing I'll say about qualitative versus quantitative is that it is important to test. It is important to be data-driven. It is absolutely important to get real answers to your questions. But we've got to remember that real experiments are hard, and this is a startup, not a science lab. And so we've always got to find that balance of experimenting, but then getting to the point where, you know what, we've got enough information that we now need to process it and make a decision. And we talk about intuition sometimes as that gut decision making. I think of intuition as just the mechanism of, using your own powers and your own processing to take the data that you've been gathering through all your experimentation and make a decision. And once you've got that data, you've got to make the decision. Remember, it's rare that you can control all the variables. It's rare, especially early on, that you have the volume of users for statistical significance. It's rare that you have the time to let an experiment fully play out. And so I'm not trying to advocate that we should run this like a science lab, but instead that we should use experimentation as a tool in our chest, in our war chest. And the biggest reason for using experimentation and data as a tool is because we have biases. And so what these research methods and experimental methods should help us with is minimizing our own biases. And so some examples, sunk cost fallacy, right? I've already spent so much time and effort on something, it's got to be the right thing. Confirmation bias, which says, I think I know something. I think I've learned everything I need to learn, maybe from one conversation or maybe just from my own imagination or my own personal challenges. Let me go out and talk to people. And when I talk to people, without realizing it, all I'm looking for is confirmation that I've stumbled upon the right thing. Or hindsight bias, right? This is a bias that lets us say, I knew all along, right? After the fact, you learn something and you can say, I knew all along that that was the right thing. Problem with all of these biases is that they prevent us from seeing the truth that's going to allow our startup and our business to succeed or fail. And so a really important aspect of building out your own business is to know and be aware of your own biases and then to counterbalance them. And the way we counterbalance them, a lot of the examples that we went through here will help us counterbalance them. In general, or more broadly, design thinking can help. Again, referencing back to IDEO, they just give a great lay of the land of design thinking. And I would say that almost everything that we talked about today is essentially an aspect of design thinking. And we'll just really quickly going through what this design thinking is all about. It's just about recognizing that there are sort of two major steps to any research, learning, brainstorming, and that's we're upfront going to diverge, expand, create choices, brainstorm, get a bunch of ideas out there, and then in a second step, converge and make choices. This is what I was talking about, even with that balance of research or experimentation and intuition, right? There's a time to be exploring and there's a time to be converging and making decisions. And so in a nutshell, design thinking is about delaying solutions, exploring multiple solutions, having a bias towards the user, and understanding full context and the jobs to be done. I paint this high level picture of design thinking because if you're out exploring the different research methodologies that you can use, it's kind of a keyword that you can go off of to find those. And then finally, one most important tactic in all of this is iteration, whether it's iteration on our business plan or our lean canvas, iteration on our product, iteration on our experiments. This is one of the most important things that we can do, is recognize that our journey is not a line from start to finish as we build out our startup, but it's actually a set of loops and circles, and we need to take those into account. So we covered a lot, and maybe just to summarize, the path of least resistance, the thing that we know for sure, the thing that we feel most comfortable with, can lead us into a trap. And that trap is to believe that all we need to do is build something interesting and we'll create a business around it. And so the way we avoid that trap is we don't go down the path of least resistance. We find the thing about our plan or about our business that makes us most uncomfortable, and we actively take steps to de-risk that thing. And we do that in the simplest way possible because we're entrepreneurs, because we want to be efficient, right? We're not gonna de-risk by building everything. We're gonna de-risk by finding the simplest thing that's gonna let us put our fears at ease, and then we move on to the next most uncomfortable thing. And I think most importantly, even in challenging times, you can create something valuable, but it's more important than ever to solve real customer pain points. There is not time and room now to let ourselves be taken by our biases to building something that we think is valuable without doing the work to prove that it is. And so hopefully these tools will help you find ways to paint that picture and de-risk the thing that makes you most uncomfortable, and continue on till you have a successful startup, a successful business, a successful product that's working. As I said, you know, this will be shared out so you can have all the links and you can reference the materials. And I'm really appreciative of everybody spending their time here with me. We only have 3 minutes. Maybe there is enough time for 1 or 2 questions. I'll see if Samantha has any that she wants to read out. But like I said, we can carry the conversation to the DigitalOcean community as well, and use the online community to have some Q&A. Samantha, is there are there 1 or 2 questions we might want to hit on?
Yes, thank you, Jake. You've received many, many questions, and I'm sorry we won't have time to answer all of them, but I'm going to try my best to summarize a bunch of them for you here. One question that kept on coming up over and over again is, when do you decide whether to keep testing for ideas versus actually starting to build the product?
Yeah, I don't think there's an either or there, because building a product is not, it's not like one step, right? Like, it's not like you shift modes from testing to building and you're done. There are loops with every business, with every startup, with every product. There are always loops. And so I think what you're doing is that you're continually testing and then building, testing and then building. I don't have a better answer other than that intuition piece that I was talking about, which is if you're doing the work of testing, experimenting, and researching, if you're putting in that time and effort, then you've got to trust your intuition from that point forward to say, now's the time to act on that research. That's about the best I have.
Awesome. Well, what are your thoughts on products like Superhuman that spent a lot of time and money before launching, building before launching? They're the ones who make the trash cans and the dishwashing racks and whatnot.
Yep, and you can point to lots of other examples of products that feel more like they were built and then unveiled sort of miraculously, best example would be the iPhone. And I guess what I would say is that while it feels often like those products, all the time up front was spent building, I would argue that in many, if not all of the cases, that building time included a lot of this learning, experimentation, and iterating. It might just have happened out of view of the public. And so I think that's probably my major point. There are definitely cases where people hit a home run intuitively without testing, researching, experimenting, because maybe they're solving a problem that they understand deeply themselves and they're their own research audience. But generally speaking, I'd say in most cases, what's happening is that that iteration, research, and experimentation is happening, maybe just not in view of the public.
Thanks, Jake. In the interest of time, one last question. What are your favorite tools for getting the attention of potential customers or users for validating ideas?
Yeah, I'm going to sound old school. My favorite tool is email. You know, we use a lot of tools here at DigitalOcean to reach out to our customers when we run a beta, or we have an early release of a product. We'll often put a banner inside of our own product or on our homepage. But what works best for me is a personal email. I'll just reach out to my network or reach out to target customers, and I'll write a personal email. And for the last beta that I ran, the response rate on personal emails was by far the best response that I got. Got to start thinking one by one at a time, early days. You don't need to scale up until later on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jake. There are dozens and dozens more questions, and we apologize for not being able to get to them right here. But as Jake mentioned, feel free to ask them on our community site. We'd be happy to get back to you there. We'll also be sending an email with a recording of this webinar afterwards, where you can dive into this material some more.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.